Section 1 of Foundations of Global Health and Human Rights. We introduce the reader to the normative foundations and legal principles for understanding the role of human rights in protecting and promoting public health. The first chapter, which Larry and I developed alongside Thérèse Murphy, provides a historical narrative of human rights leading up to the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as I explained here with Thérèse. The opening chapter of Foundations of Global Health and Human Rights traces the historical evolution of rights leading up to the modern conceptualization of human rights under international law as a basis for public health. It's this history, these normative foundations, that have shaped the present movement for health and human rights. And to help us understand government obligations to realize human rights for global health, it's necessary to appreciate the centuries of struggle to realize rights that led to the post-war conceptualization of human rights under international law, leading to this codification of human rights under international law. The idea of rights has evolved throughout history through religious proclamations, philosophical reasoning, and rights-based revolutions. And these early parts of our chapter trace the birth and the development of human rights, with the notion of natural rights forged across centuries and over the course of history. Yet where these moral claims failed to protect public health, the atrocities of World War II shaped the current international human rights system, with the post-war creation of the United Nations giving birth to the notion of human rights under international law. This imperative for human rights law would form the basis in the aftermath of World War II for health obligations to be proclaimed globally under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now let me turn it over to Thérèse Murphy to tell you about the influence of the UDHR in the development of human rights to promote health.
As we know, histories of human rights are a live issue at present, and rightly so, especially, of course, on a day like today, Human Rights Day. We believe that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which dates from December the 10th of 1948, ought to be a fuller part of human rights history, and in particular, of health and human rights history. We would like students of human rights history to consider if we were right in the chapter to describe the Universal Declaration as the quiet pioneer of human rights law. We described the Universal Declaration in that way for two reasons. First, because it has often been eclipsed by the two international human rights covenants with which it forms the International Bill of Rights. And second, because its influence, the influence of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, remains underexplored. Too often, there are simply superficial references to it as the constitution or starting point of the human rights movement. We need to understand its power and influence, not simply invoke those things. So what we want, what we need within health and human rights are histories of the Universal Declaration as a living text, as a text that has grown in authority, as a text that has traveled around the world and been translated into local bills of rights, into policies, and into practices at government level and at local level, inside clinics, hospitals, health centers, individual health professional practices, and by individual people, patients and others, and by organized groups. We need these histories to spur us to think about our health and human rights past and about our future.